Today, we're going to be joined by Eric Ratcliffe. Eric is a partner and director of compliance strategy at 360 Advanced, based here in Florida. And we brought Eric to the program to discuss something that companies are struggling with in terms of understanding their system and organization controls and the reports that outline that system and organizational control framework that they have in their organization or that their vendors have in their organizations. And we're going to get into some basic issues to understand what a SOC report is. And we're grateful that Eric is here to help us do that.
Is it just a matter of them trying to be really proactive and get out ahead of managing risk? Or are they receiving requests specifically for their SOC to type 2 report, for example, in connection with an engagement they're trying to get? Like, what's the impetus for doing this?
It's kind of all the above. I've probably had 3,000 conversations with organizations over my 15 to 17 years at 360 Advanced. And I've seen many of them, they know it's a go-to-market requirement.
Welcome to the We Get Privacy podcast. I'm Damon Silver, and I'm joined by my co-host, Joe Lazzarotti. Joe and I co-lead the Privacy AI and Cybersecurity group at Jackson Lewis. And in that role, we receive a variety of questions every day from our clients, all of which boil down to the core question of how do we handle our data safely? In other words, how do we leverage all the great things data can do for our organizations without running headfirst into a wall of legal risk? And how can we manage that risk without unnecessarily hindering our business operations?
On each episode of the podcast, Damon and I are going to talk through common questions that we're getting from our clients. And we're going to talk it through in the same way that we would with our clients, meaning with a focus on the practical. What are the legal risks? What options are available to manage those risks? And what should we be mindful of from an execution perspective? Today, we're going to be joined by Eric Ratcliffe. Eric is a partner and director of compliance strategy at 360 Advanced, based here in Florida. And we brought Eric to the program to discuss something that companies are struggling with in terms of understanding their system and organization controls and the reports that outline that system and organizational control framework that they have in their organization or that their vendors have in their organizations. And we're going to get into some basic issues to understand what a SOC report is. And we're grateful that Eric is here to help us do that. So Eric, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Damon and Joe. Looking forward to talking a little bit about SOC 2, kind of the history, really answer any questions that are coming up from your clients and prospects.
Awesome. So maybe a good place to start, Eric, and I know 360 Advanced does a ton of SOC audits of various types. And so that expertise, I think, will be really helpful for us today. And so maybe to start off with, help us understand, well, what is a SOC report? What are we talking about when we say SOC and SOC type 1 and type 2? Give us a sense of that.
Sure. Yeah. What's interesting about it, because it seems to be somewhat of a new thing, it's growing so fast and call it the last 3 to 4 years, but it really started almost 30 years ago. So the AI CPA, who really governs the reporting, built this again 30 years ago. Back then, it was called SAS 70. About 15 years ago, it was revamped and renamed SOC for Service Organization Controls. So really, the purpose is it's a report that helps organizations define their systems and controls that are in place to help protect customer data and meet industry best practices. A lot of times I'm asked, well, who needs it? Even law firms, even us as a CPA firm, we do one on an annual basis. We're actually hiring a competitor to come in and audit us. Because at the end of the day, it's really for any vendor that's handling customer data. That's where it really draws the line of, it's typically B2B interactions, not necessarily a B2C environment.
What's prompting you and what's prompting the customers that you work with to go through this process? I mean, is it just a matter of them trying to be really proactive and get out ahead of managing risk? Or are they receiving requests specifically for their SOC to type 2 report, for example, in connection with an engagement they're trying to get? Like what's the impetus for doing this?
It's kind of all the above. I've probably had 3,000 conversations with organizations over my 15 to 17 years at 360 Advanced, and I've seen many of them. They know it's a go-to-market requirement. So we even have some small SaaS startups that know that, say they're selling into the financial services industry. Many of them will have to do PCI. They'll have to do a SOC report before they put one piece of data in there from their customers. So in that situation, it's just a must for a go-to-market strategy. In the majority that I'm speaking with, it's normally a requirement in their contractual obligations. So before they transact any information in their systems, their customers are going to require a SOC 2 to be in place before that data starts flowing.
So when you think about those different use cases for SOC, one of the things that I'm curious if you're seeing this as well, one of the things that happens in our world, for example, recently and I think we may have talked about this, Eric, offline, but the DOL put out some guidance saying that any fiduciary to an ERISA covered plan has to assess the cybersecurity of their vendors, the vendor service providers that provide services to those employee benefit plans. And it's the same, I think it's kind of the same type of vendor assessment that you would do even outside of an ERISA plan context. But the idea is company has this mandate now as a fiduciary for their plans, and they go out and maybe one thing that they get from their vendor as part of that assessment process is a SOC. And if you're not in the space like you are, that really understands what it is that they're getting, help us understand, if you're sitting in that position as a fiduciary, how might you want to look at that? How do you look at that SOC and say, what are 3 things I should look at to say, is this valuable to me and what I'm trying to accomplish by assessing the cybersecurity of this particular vendor, looking at the SOC that they give you? What are those things that they should be asking about it?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, because what we find is it's somewhat unfortunate, but these reports get passed out, and basically it's a check, we received it. I'd say larger organizations with a more savvy vendor due diligence team, security team, they're going through that report. But some of the things that I think everyone should, at a minimum, review is make sure the scope matches what the services are that you are purchasing from that organization. You think of some large organizations that may do several different types of services. Let's just look at a data center, for example. Some data centers may offer, just a colo space, AC, security, but they also offer managed services where they're putting hands-on keyboard on the equipment. What happens is some of those SOC reports only cover the co-location piece. And if you are there using them for managed services, that's where you want to make sure that the scope is not just co-location, that it extends out into the managed services side. So that's one of the big ones. Make sure the scope matches the service. And then also look at the trust services criteria. I know we haven't gotten into what, really the components of that SOC report are, but there are what are called trust services criteria that used to be called categories. And those are security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. At a minimum, an organization must include security. So then why add the others? Again, it's about the data and the type of service. If you're passing a PII through that system, you should probably expect or ask for them to include privacy. If not, security may just meet the needs for what the services are. So that's part of understanding the scope and kind of the boundaries are covering what you care about. In addition to that, I would say look at the testing procedures. It should not just be inquiry only, right? There should be some type of test that's going on. Make sure the test is adequate to kind of what your risk appetite is. And then if are any gaps, are there remediation plans noted in the report? The report should really give a good description of that organization's security posture at the end of the day.
All right, quick follow up on that. Does the report make note of items that were flagged for remediation the prior year and what steps have been taken to actually act on those? Is that something that's covered?
No, not typically. In most cases, you think about these reports, and I think, Joe, you had asked about the difference in a type 1 and a type 2 report. The type 1 is as of a point in time. So that's what most organizations will start with. When they go to the type 2, that's where it's covering a period of time. So I guess, Damon, really the way to answer that is it depends. So if that control had call it some exceptions or failures during that period, there could be a section to where management is kind of outlining what took place, why did the exception happen, and what remediation steps took place to have corrective actions on that failed control or exception. So I guess the answer is depends on when that remediation did take place. If it was within that audit period, then yes, they would have an opportunity to explain how and when the exception was remediated.
So is it fair to say, Eric, I know you're seeing this, suppose a company receives a SOC from a vendor and the report is dated 6 or 8 months, maybe 12 months prior to the date that they receive it. And that during that time, there might have been some pretty significant changes in the governance, the leadership, the technology that particular vendor is using. Do you see recipients of these reports that are evaluating a vendor go back and say, okay, we need you to update this? Like, do you guys in your business do updates or some type of way to fill that gap in the report between when it was done and when you looked at it, which may even be before the date of the report and the date that the company is getting that representation of the SOC of that organization?
Yeah, there's actually the AICPA has also created a deliverable called AUP for Agreed Upon Procedures. It was a few years ago. We had one of our clients had an incident, and their largest customer had asked that we come in and retest the controls that had failure that caused the incident. So in that case, we followed AICPA guidelines and retested the areas that the exceptions could have, let's say, occurred or caused the incident. And then we were able to report on that kind of as a point in time to show that, hey, the controls are now operating as intended.
You made an interesting point, Eric, earlier about making sure that the scope of the SOC report matches the scope of the services that the customer is receiving. Would it typically be the case that all services offered by a vendor are covered within one SOC report, or might there be multiple reports that align with different lines of business different lines of services that the vendor offers?
Yeah, we do at times give recommendations to separate reports. Again, thinking of very large organizations. I mean, I have one organization that we actually issue 32 different SOC 2 reports, and it's a very large organization. But think about the readers of the reports are in most cases different readers. So you think about. In this situation, it's in the education space. Well, they have reports for, say, certifications for teachers. And then they may have another one that may be certifications for professional services. They may have a report for healthcare certifications. So the person that's reading the healthcare doesn't care about the education one. So at that point, again, it's lining up the scope, understanding the boundaries of the systems. And if the systems are really segmented like that, And many times it makes sense to do separate reports. Because what happens is when you start putting many services and many different, call it business units in one report, it kind of muddies up the report. It's hard to follow, hard to understand, what actually, where those boundaries are matching the services they're providing you. It also can create some risk on the organization that's having the SOC report completed, because if they had an exception from one business unit, it can have a negative impact on the entire report. But yeah, that's a really good observation. And again, I always say it does depend on, again, I try to look at who's the reader of the report. If they're totally separate readers, you may want to consider doing separate reports.
So, Eric, this has been really helpful, I think, for us and for our listeners. Maybe a good place to kind of wrap us up is, obviously, this is a changing environment. I know you mentioned there's some older standards that have been replaced with the SOC process, and maybe there's some things coming up that we should know about. So can you give us some trends that you're seeing with utilization of SOCs, and maybe how are we thinking about this from in an AI context? How is that? Is there a SOC development for AI? Can you talk about a little bit about that? What we got to see going forward?
Yeah, I think this is the first time I've been on any calls that we've lasted this long without dropping the word AI. So that's really obviously the hot topic right now. So what we are seeing and preparing for is how do you address that risk? We're hearing rumblings that AI CPA is working on something, and nothing has been published or issued at this moment. But with that, ISO, International Standards Organization, now has, most people are familiar with ISO 27001, but that really wasn't addressing AI risk. So what we're seeing now is there is ISO 42001, 42001, and that is really geared for AI, whether you're a user or creator of AI. So that is what we have been doing. Really, a lot of discovery calls, getting starting some new projects around ISO 42001, and then NIST also has created. It's called the RMF. So that is another product that helps address AI risk. But 42001 seems to be the predominant one that we're seeing the most of.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it seems like there'll be a lot more to come from the standpoint of these reports and how companies are using them. And this has been really helpful to give our listeners some insights into that. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure, and happy to help any of your customers. If anyone has questions, and Damon and Joe, I really thank you for the time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Eric. And as always, for our listeners, if you have any feedback on this episode, any suggestions for future episodes, you can email us at privacy@jacksonlewis.com.
Thank you for listening to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Privacy. As a reminder, this material is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create a client-lawyer relationship between Jackson Lewis and any recipient. We Get Privacy is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. For more information on our topics, presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com.